I love you, Dada.
A mother, a teacher, a foster parent who spoke about the importance of adoption is now accused of a sickening crime.
You know, I totally had a great, he's such a relationship kid. I totally connected with him.
This 35-year-old is now facing 2 counts of incest for what she allegedly did to 2 children she adopted. I'll tell you what police say she reportedly admitted to in court. We're on the case presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey guys, real quick, before we get into this very disturbing story from the Pacific Northwest, I need to talk about our partner and sponsor, Upside. It is a free app that gets you cash back on everyday purchases like gas, groceries, and takeout. All you have to do is download Upside for free, then claim an offer at their 100,000 plus locations, then pay like you normally would with your card. After that, you verify the purchase and you get money back. I've used it plenty of times. Maybe I'm pumping gas. Maybe I'm ordering takeout. I look for offers on Upside first. Then after I spend, money appears in my app and I just transfer it straight to my bank. Now, Upside's frequent users earn an average of $254 back a year. So to start getting your cash back, click the link in the description or scan the QR code and use promo code OTC to get an extra 25 cents bonus on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Well, it seems like every week we are hearing about a teacher accused of sexually abusing a young person. And I often wonder if it's happening more or we're just reporting on them more and they're getting a lot of attention. And it's raising awareness that a predator can look like anyone. And often, as we see in these stories, that predators can be hiding in plain sight. Now, what we're talking about here, this story out of Washington State, these are allegations. And the teacher we're talking about is innocent until proven guilty. But I want to lay out what authorities in Washington State say about 35-year-old Amber Swain. Now, the 35-year-old, as you see her here, this is a picture of Amber on Facebook. She is a mom. And not only did she take care of young people at home, she was in charge of taking care of young people as a professional. She was a teacher in Newport, Washington, in the public school district there. Now, Newport, it's a small town outside of Spokane. And this is her picture, Amber Swain, from the local school district. Now, this case, what she is facing, these allegations, they're incredibly disturbing because Swain is accused of incest. Now, she is someone who presented herself as a person who truly believed in taking care of others, especially young people. Now, before we get to the details that are being laid out in court, I want to talk more about how we got to this point and what we know about Amber Swain, because her background is one you would not expect in a story like this.
So we became foster parents that following August, so the year after he was in my class.
This is a video that we found on YouTube of Swain talking about how she became a foster parent. She spoke on a podcast. Swain says that in her first year of teaching at the elementary school level, she took to a young boy in her 3rd grade class. And she said the boy was dealing with a tough situation at home. So she and her husband decided to adopt this boy, become his foster parents. It's the type of thing, I mean, you think back to like the movie Matilda. I mean, it's the type of storybook that you often feel good about when you hear of a teacher taking to someone who may be in a tough situation. And that's what appeared that this was with Amber Swain. Swain says that she later adopted this boy's younger brother as well. I mean, it seems like this woman is an angel, right? In total, Swain and her husband say that they adopted 3 boys. Now, according to the Daily Mail, Swain is now separated from her husband. Swain worked not only just as a teacher, but she was the executive director for a nonprofit in Spokane that supported children and caretakers in the foster care system. Now, it's unclear when she left that organization, but her name has been scrubbed from their website. Now, Amber Swain appears to be the kind-hearted person, a selfless individual who you would want to take a child in who's in a tough situation. But now she's facing these shocking allegations of sexual abuse, and let's get into that part of this story. Now, the local sheriff says that they were contacted by the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families in May about Amber Swain. Now, there were concerns back then about possible sexual abuse of 2 teenagers. The Spokesman newspaper says in court a probable cause affidavit was read, And in that document, Swain was accused of sexually abusing 2 teenagers in her care. And the abuse is alleged to have gone on for months and happened as recently as 2 days before one of the teens was interviewed by authorities back in May. The investigation reportedly started after law enforcement saw text messages between Swain and one of the victims. Now, the alleged victims, they are now 17 years old and 18 years old. So this is key when you talk about the alleged timeline of when Swain is accused of committing these crimes. According to a forensic interview, and this is according to reporting from KREM television out in the Pacific Northwest, one of the boys allegedly told police that Swain had sex with him in December of last year, and that would have been before he turned the age of 18. Now, I'll tell you how Swain reportedly responded to that when she was confronted with that allegation in just a moment. The TV station says that the teen allegedly told authorities that he and Swain had sex, quote, plenty of times after that. That includes the time just before he gave a forensic interview, just 2 days, according to authorities, before he spoke to them. So let's talk about what Amber had to say when she was confronted by law enforcement with these incredibly disturbing allegations. Now, initially, she reportedly denied having sex with this teenager, but then she shockingly, allegedly admitted that she did have sex with that teen. But she says it happened in February. And that is important because when it comes to the timeline in this case, that boy, if they had sex in February, he would have been 18. That's obviously a different story, though, than the one that he gave to authorities about the alleged sexual relationship they had starting in December when he was 17 years old. Now, Swain also reportedly said this to authorities, quote, I could have my timeline messed up. Swain is accused of sex, though not just with one of the foster children that she adopted. She's accused of sexual contact with 2 of the foster children that she adopted. And here's what KREM reported from that court hearing. The second teenager told police that he allegedly touched Swain more than once. He said the touching continued for several minutes before Swain stopped it from going any further. And Swain allegedly told police a similar story, that she had been touched, but she pushed it away. It's important to note that this woman is 35 years old. She is a teacher. She is a foster parent. She knows what is okay and what isn't okay. And the fact that it allegedly went on for several minutes and then she allegedly pushed it away, it's not an excuse. Now, this is video from Amber Swain's first court appearance where the judge found probable cause for 3 charges: first-degree incest, second-degree incest, and sexual contact with a minor. Swain allegedly may have reached out to one of the alleged victims as well from jail, and prosecutors asked for a no-contact order between Swain and the boys or any other minor. Local papers say Swain is not allowed to leave the state of Washington. She was held on a $20,000 bond, and prosecutors did go into this asking for a $50,000 bond. Now, Swain could be sentenced to 20 years in prison and face $50,000 in fines if she's found guilty of these 3 charges that she faces. Now, as for her job as a teacher, which she has had for years, she is currently on administrative leave, and the Newport School District told KREM, quote, while we cannot say much at this time, we unequivocally and firmly state that we take these matters very seriously. We are working closely with law enforcement as they continue their investigation into this matter. Join us now to talk more about this case and where it could go from here is former sex crimes prosecutor Dan Shore. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. I mean, these cases are just so disturbing and disheartening as well, to be honest. Just as you read through it, what are some of the unique parts of this story when you think of a lot of the cases, unfortunately, we talk about like this?
You know, a lot of times we talk about the cases, we talk about how there's a pattern here that we see in a lot of cases, such as where there's a teacher abusing their power to have sexual interactions with someone. But I could tell you, in over 25 years, I've handled hundreds and hundreds of sexual misconduct cases. Hardly ever do we have cases involving incest. Do we have, this is someone who, we certainly, people unfortunately have allegations of sexual misconduct with children and people they've adopted. So it's not that it never happens. Unfortunately, it does happen. But this is an unusual case where there's 2 teenage boys that were in foster care. They were foster children. And the allegation is that she had sexual interactions with both of them. We don't see those types of allegations that often, but they're very concerning, and it's important to take that seriously.
Yeah, and I think too of like the term incest, where she is the legal guardian of these two children, these teenagers. But when I guess when I always like think of incest, you think of someone who is actually related. But apparently, in this case, it's really more from like a legal standpoint of her being the legal adopted parent for these two teenagers.
Yeah, and from a public policy perspective, that makes sense. Where even if they're not blood related, certainly you want someone who's in the position of being a mother, who's got them as foster children. That person is their mother in terms of raising them. And I know from interacting with people who were foster kids that they do see the person who raised them as their mother, as their father. That is a really significant part of their understanding of the dynamic of the relationship for many people. So for someone to have that relationship and then engage in sexual interactions with them, that is violating what we as a society want to prohibit, which is people having sex with someone, not only a relative, but also someone who you're caring for, and someone who is in the foster system is usually in a vulnerable position and very dependent on the person who's living with them, who is the parental figure now. So that person is a big power imbalance and a dependency that can be exploited, unfortunately.
Yeah, part of this too is the timeline of all of it, where there is currently now one of the alleged victims is 18 years old, and he alleges that there was sexual contact when he was 17, which would have been around December. And then apparently this continued on multiple times, and there was plenty of times. She has said that it was February, and the difference there would have been he would have been 18 years old. So he would have been legally an adult at that time, which I know it's the law, and that's the world that we deal in, but it always just is, I think in some cases, like the difference of a couple of months and the way that the law could look at that. If there's no proof, maybe there's text messages, maybe there's certainly the word of the victim in this case. I mean, how do you prove the December part of it compared to the February part of it? And then is there no case at all once he's 18 years old, if it's a consensual, considered to be a consensual sexual relationship?
Well, there are ways to explore that. First of all, someone's account is evidence. And I think sometimes in society, people say, oh, there's no evidence of that. It's just your word. But someone's word is evidence. And people are convicted in criminal court based on beyond a reasonable doubt, based on the word of someone who says they were victimized. So that can be enough. Maybe there's contemporaneous conversations with other people, such as someone telling a friend or another family member that something was happening with the woman who is accused of this misconduct. So there are ways to explore to see if something happened that can corroborate the timing. If it happened after that, then, I mean, it sounds like she's still in a mother role to him, and she's a foster parent. So then the Washington legal system would have to figure out whether that still violates the law. But regardless, this is a really serious situation where someone's in the foster system, they are dependent on someone, and then there's some kind of sexual interaction. But to your other point about it seems sometimes strange that a few days can make a big difference.
Right.
I think people wrestle with that, and that's why different states have different cutoffs for age of consent. In New York, it's 17. Some states, it could be 18 or 16. And I think it comes down to there's no single day that all of a sudden someone becomes able to consent to sexual activity, but we need to draw a line somewhere. So state legislatures have tried to come up with what they think is best as the time. But you can't just, it's really arbitrary, but there needs to be an arbitrary determination, because at some point we have to say it's per se illegal. And whatever you decide is going to be a day before that or a day after that's going to change people's perception of that.
How difficult is it in cases like this where you're dealing with someone, we're not talking about, and we've talked about horrific cases involving children who are very young, but in this case, they are close to the age of consent. And then, of course, there's, potentially the defense that they were of the age of consent and legally an adult. How challenging is that if a case like this goes to trial as a prosecutor to get a jury to understand that it is still very much illegal and still very much disturbing and whatever adjective you want to use to describe it if allegations like this are true?
A lot of that comes down to jury selection, and jury selection is a real skill for both prosecutors and defense attorneys for questioning potential jurors, getting to the root of those issues, seeing which juries are going to be understanding of a certain argument or not. And there are many trials where they're won or lost on jury selection, even before any evidence is presented, because there'll be a jury who takes this seriously versus a jury that doesn't take this seriously. And that's really important. But certainly society has evolved a lot in the time I've been working on these cases, where I think now there's an understanding that even though there is a underage male victim and the defendant is a woman, people take that much more seriously than I think they did 25 years ago, where people tended to more likely take sex abuse seriously when there was a female involved who was underage and a male who was older. But I think now we recognize that the traumatic repercussions of sex abuse, whether it's from this case or a teacher or anything like that, is still extremely serious, even if the gender is not what people traditionally see as sex abuse.
And when it comes to the second alleged victim in this case, he's 17 years old. I don't think that there's a debate of whether or not he was a minor when it allegedly happened, but he allegedly admits to law enforcement, and then her story, just based off what's been reported off a probable cause affidavit that was read in court that local media took in, that her story somewhat lines up, that he initiated the touching. And so, and then she eventually stops it, but it continued on. There are many people, and maybe not many, but there are going to be people who are going to look at that and say that she was not the person who initiated it. So what's the crime here?
Right. And that's completely irrelevant, because if someone's underage, they're deemed to be incapable of consent. And that's extremely important, that they're incapable of consent. So, and we've seen this in other cases. I've seen this in cases I prosecute, where someone says, and a lot of those cases have been involving older men and younger women, where they say, oh, but she was only 16, but she came on to me. She was at a club. She was hitting on me. And it just doesn't matter. It's a strict liability crime, which means that if someone's underage, they're deemed incapable of consent. And there are important reasons for the law being framed like that, is that we don't want the trial to be about who initiated it when someone is underage. They're not deemed capable of consent. And maybe these issues can be a factor in sentencing later, but certainly they're not going to get someone off from being convicted just because the other person initiated it.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. I'm not saying that, but
we see those. Do make that argument.
Not for you, but just saying for people watching this, just like those are the comments you see, and those are the perspectives that are out there. And I think another perspective part of it, and we've talked about this often, when the defendants in cases like this, maybe a mom, female, whatever it may be, because you do look at a case where if roles were reversed and you have a 60-year-old man and a 16-year-old, girl, and you hear that argument, does it become more difficult when the victim in cases like this is a 17-year-old boy?
I think that it makes it more difficult with certain jurors and certain judges too. Certain judges, especially older judges, may not be as sensitive to these issues. Certain jurors may not be sensitive. So it makes it more difficult, not legally, but in reality, when you're trying to convince a jury to take it seriously, a judge to take it seriously, they may, based on gender roles, based on whether the younger person seemed to initiate some sexual contact, people may not take it as seriously. But I think it's better than it used to be. I know for sure it was, because I used to see a lot more people in court who just didn't take it seriously if there was an underage male victim, especially with a female defendant. And I think that's changing for a lot of people. But as I said before, who is the jury and who is the judge are really important factors in how seriously that's going to be taken.
Which, can be a challenge in and of itself when determining, these types of cases and all of that. For her role, I think part of the shocking nature of this, no matter what you do as a profession, for someone to be accused of this type of crime is, of course, shocking. But she was a public school teacher, and she also was active in the community, not only just a foster parent, but really an advocate at one point in the foster parent community. And how could that factor into the case that the prosecution puts together? Because, again, no matter what you do for a job, age of consent, knowing right and wrong, but I would imagine in these positions you are taught, and there's a level of awareness and training that comes as well with understanding what is right and wrong. Like, does the profession part of it factor into the case that maybe the prosecutors tell if this is something that goes in front of a jury eventually?
Yeah, on the one hand, she should know the rules being part of the foster care system. I have also seen many cases where people are very active in causes that seem very, very benevolent, and that gives them access to underage people who sometimes are then sexually abused. In a much more extreme case, we have Jerry Sandusky at Penn State, where he was accused and convicted of molesting many boys. How did he get access? He was running charities and camps for these young people that seemed just amazingly nice. And so often in many cases, people who engage in sex abuse, they have access to children from the work that they're doing. They have access to underage people. So that's certainly a pattern that we see a lot, unfortunately.
And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of stories recently of teachers in these types of situations. I mean, it does seem like every day, if not every week, that there's a case, that we're talking about, or one that makes news somewhere. And I've probably asked you this question before, but do you feel that this is happening more often? And in this case, the victims are not, currently her students, but allegedly. But do you feel that there are these cases that are happening more, or is it there's just an awareness of these cases and more reporting on these cases, and it's something that's been going on for a long time?
Right. Having been involved in this area for over 25 years, I feel very confident that it's not happening more often. I see sometimes people refer to an epidemic of sex abuse, especially on college campuses, an epidemic of sexual assault. And I strongly feel, based on my work, that people are, for good reason, more confident to report incidents of sex abuse, because earlier people didn't know where to go. It was less likely to be taken seriously. So people thought correctly they wouldn't be taken seriously. So people did not speak up. And now there's a different world where they are taken seriously. People can report more. There's also ways to get the word out more, such as social media allows people. There's a lot of negatives about social media, but one of the positives is people have an opportunity to tell their story that's unfiltered by law enforcement or the media. And I think one example is when you see so many cases of sex abuse alleged from 50s, 60s, 70s that came out in the last decade or so, when laws were changed to allow people to come forward. So it shows that this was happening, but people, I think correctly and tragically, didn't feel they could step up and say anything because they wouldn't be believed or they wouldn't be taken seriously.
And then, for her being, and this is probably similar to that, where, certainly for us in covering crime stories, you maybe only talk about the foster care system in the worst of moments. And when you hear of abuse that happens in foster care homes and communities, like, how often would you come across? Because obviously I think the vast majority of people who would go into adoption and foster care, very special people take that on. But at the same time, you do have cases where there are allegations like this. There are certainly other types of cases of abuse that we've seen. Like, how often, when you prosecuted sex crime cases, would the foster care system come into play?
I definitely had cases in the foster care system, but there were cases obviously that weren't in the foster care system. I think what makes the foster care system different in one respect is that often those systems are overloaded, that they're understaffed, and that sometimes it's not oversight about what's happening. Also, you often have children who are at risk because they maybe did not start their upbringing in a stable family environment, and that may lead to them being less believed, even if they're experiencing sex abuse. I've seen that happen. So I think that leads sometimes people not to report something. There's also people, the children who are in foster care are often understandably very concerned and desperate to get a stable situation. So it is more risk to reporting because they may lose that and go back to a home that's abusive or some other situation, abusive in a different way. And a lot of reason for people to stay silent. So I think it's easier for people to be victimized in that system for those reasons.
Yeah, and it's just cases like this. They're just it's so disheartening, to see allegations like this. Dan Shore, former sex crimes prosecutor. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime, and I know you write about in a lot of cases like this, kind of based on your experience. Really important work. Where can people find your most recent book and some of the other writing that you do?
Sure. My last novel, which came out a few months ago, is called Open Bar, and it is about sexual misconduct cases of underage people and just how the system sometimes succeeds and sometimes fails in caring for them. And people can find that on any site that has books, such as Amazon, or they could find me on Substack.
All right, Dan Shore, former sex crimes prosecutor. Always great to have you here on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
It's always good to talk with you. Thanks.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we're also now streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.